From the virulent diseases and demonic parasites of the DeathGuard to the demonic rituals and ritualistic sacrifices of the Wordbearers, for as long as the Chaos Space Marines have blighted the physical universe, life for people living within the Imperium has been a horrifying existence. Within the Warhammer community, debate has raged for decades over which of the Chaos Legions is the scariest, but still to this day, a consensus has not really been reached. Much like Chaos itself, horror is multifaceted and comes in infinite different forms. Fear is a subjective experience, where one person may definitively state that there's nothing scarier than being captured by the Iron Warriors and dragged off to Medringar, as someone else may find the psychological horror and paranoia of the Alpha Legion, or the idea of being hunted by one of the Night Lords to be the subject of their worst nightmares. In today's video, we're going to explore what makes each and every one of the Chaos Legions uniquely horrifying. We're going to be talking about what it would actually be like to encounter them in person, including all of the terrible things that such an encounter would inevitably subject us to. We're going to get into the dark corners of their lore, as well as the real-world horror genres that were used as inspiration for their design, tactics, and philosophies. Also, before we get into it, a big thank you to everyone who has sent words of support or expressed concern after finding out that me and my wife were impacted by Hurricane Milton. Long story short, both our house and our studio, which is a separate building, got flooded. So life has been pretty chaotic and stressful, to say the least. We're staying with family and I've got a makeshift studio set up here so I can start working on videos again, but my schedule is going to be kind of all over the place for a little while. Current estimates say that we won't have our home back for at least 3 months, so that sucks, but thank you all for being patient with me as I navigate through this difficult period. Even still, it could have been a lot worse, and yes, before you ask, all of our miniatures are safe. So with that good news established, let's dive headfirst into the Grimdark and kick things off with everyone's favorite nasty boys, the DeathGuard. With many of the legions that we're going to talk about in this video, their horror elements are a lot more subtle and require an explanation of their lore in order to get creeped out by them. But the DeathGuard? It's the exact opposite. What makes them horrifying is immediately obvious just by looking at them. They are hands down the most physically corrupted and mutated of all of the heretic Astartes, their bodies having swollen and decayed under the weight of the Grandfather's bountiful gifts. I'm probably preaching to the choir with this one, but if you're not normally a big horror movie fan, you might not be familiar with all of its subgenres, one of the most popular being that of body horror, meaning horror that derives its fear from the mutation, corruption, and violation of the human form. And let me tell you, body horror is something that the DeathGuard do better than any other legion. Each and every one of their Plague Marines is a grotesque abomination, their bodies having become so bloated with disease that they swell and distend, their flesh often ripping open, causing their organs to spill forth and drag behind them through the muck and grime of the battlefield. They are each a walking incubation chamber for trillions of writhing demonic parasites, and a potent cocktail of every pox, malady, and contagion in the galaxy. These guys are trapped in a moment of time just before death, trapped in eternal agony beyond anything or anyone born of the physical universe can possibly imagine, yet they're still unable to die. Their stench alone is said to be so horrific and indescribable that the human mind is simply not capable of processing it. To smell the raw essence of death that they exhume is not just to experience revulsion on a level not thought possible, but it is to risk both physical effects such as temporary or even permanent paralysis, or mental ones such as an all-consuming sense of panic that breaks their victims' morale and fractures their sanity. They are a living plague that spreads Nurgle's corrupting influence with every step, gradually transforming entire worlds into necrotic wastelands. In addition to body horror, they represent the psychological horror of transformation into something monstrous against one's will. If you're unfamiliar with their lore, just like all Chaos Space Marine legions, they used to be loyal to the Emperor and mankind. But after siding with Horus during his rebellion, and after the treachery of Typhon, the Chaos God of Plagues Nurgle mutated them into the disgusting Plague Marines we know today, condemning the Legion to an eternal existence of rotting servitude. Truly, the worst thing about encountering the DeathGuard is not just that they are seemingly invincible enemies that incite fear on a primal level, but it's the fact that all of the corruption that makes them uniquely horrifying is contagious. To stand against them is to invite their plagues into your body. It is to know your death will not be quick, nor will it be painless. You will suffer the agony of decay in its purest form, kept alive as an incubation chamber, a walking ground zero that spreads Nurgle's twisted maladies to everyone you ever cared about. Your body will mutate, and the moment death comes for you, the second your last remaining shred of hope welcomes the sweet release of oblivion, the true horror of chaos presents itself. Death is not an end, but only a stage in the great cycle. The sons of Mortarion will raise you once more as a plague zombie or a poxwalker, your consciousness shackled to a decaying form you can no longer control, enslaved just as they are to the grandfather's will. So everything about the way they look and what they do is pretty creepy, but it's also combined with a particularly disturbing personality that at first seems somewhat out of place. Rather than being bombastic, gripped by supernatural fury, or overwhelmed with zealous frenzy like other legions, all of the Plague Marines within the DeathGuard are said to be bellicose and somber, characterized more by a profound sense of apathy. They don't bellow out war cries or challenges to enemy combatants. They don't launch spearhead assaults or flanking surprise attacks. Instead, they march forward towards their enemies at an unhurried pace, seemingly unbothered by anything around them. Their bloated, leprous forms know nothing of pain and are almost completely impervious to damage. Wounds that would kill a normal man simply re-knit themselves with supernatural speed. If the Plague Marine even notices his own injuries, they seldom show any emotion other than idle curiosity or subtle amusement. No matter what you throw at them, no matter what tactics you attempt to employ, they never halt in their advance. They are as death itself, an inevitability whose shadow follows us wherever we go, the creeping doom that stalks 1,000 worlds. They stand as a grim reminder of both our own mortality and that entropy is the true state of the universe, that all living things will inevitably rot.
Before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Into the AM. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a huge fan of graphic tees, but the only issue is you find one that you like, and after a couple of times through the wash, it starts to shrink, and the graphic begins to fade and crack to the point where you don't even really know what you're looking at anymore. Well, the good news is that Into the AM shirts are shrink and fade resistant, and they're about 20% longer than a normal t-shirt. Not long enough to look out of place when they're not tucked in, but also not enough to show off your belly every single time you lift your arms up. They're also made out of high quality material and are easily the comfiest shirts that I own. Now, although Into the AM's iconic graphic tees are easily my favorite thing that they make, they also have all kinds of other clothing options that are equally stylish and comfortable. In fact, they just launched their brand new fall catalog, which has a ton of long sleeve polos, waffle knit hoodies, joggers, and jackets. So whether you're working hard and want to do so in a comfortable, relaxed fit, or you're looking to upgrade your wardrobe this autumn, Into the AM's got something for you. Into the AM is offering my viewers 10% off their entire order when you go to intotheam.com/WesHammer or use code WesHammer at checkout. The link's going to be down in the description below. Again, that's intotheam.com/WesHammer to get 10% off your entire order. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video.
If you were to encounter one of the berserkers of the World Eaters on the battlefield, you would witness a towering figure clad in blood-drenched armor, adorned with the grisly trophies taken from his victims. He is a walking effigy of horror, a visual representation of violence in its most distilled form, and his eyes, which are fixated unblinking upon you, burn with blood-crazed madness. He charges, moving faster than something that size has any right to. He doesn't hesitate or falter, and is consumed with an overwhelming compulsion to kill you and take your skull. Even if you're armed, it doesn't matter, as this unholy butcher ignores any wounds you're able to inflict and doesn't register any pain. So consumed is he in his rage. It's in this moment where you witness the supernatural fury of the World Eaters that you realize that though he is still shaped like a man, there's no humanity left in that armor. This is a creature of bottomless rage, a hurricane of violence from which there is no escape. The World Eater's presence heralds not simply another massacre, but the complete and utter annihilation of anything that stands in their way. Each and every one of them has a particularly brutal device known as the Butcher's Nails that has been crudely shoved into their brain that strips them of rationality, empathy, and control. After somebody is implemented with one of these things, the host will forever be subject to mental and physical agony every minute of every day. The only way that they're capable of finding any kind of relief from this pain is during the heat of battle, where anger, rage, and gratuitous violence act as an antidote to their suffering. Such relief, however, is only temporary, as once the battle is at its end and their foes lay slaughtered, the nails biting begins once more, kicking off an endless cycle where they will hunt for more prey. Now, the fact that they are an entire legion of single-minded, gore-drenched psychopaths, each with the strength of a dozen silverback gorillas, is scary enough as it is. But seeing as how they are worshippers of the blood god Khorne, there's a whole nother level to their horror elements. Not only does Khorne amplify their strength and bloodlust to supernatural levels, but for the World Eaters themselves, every act of slaughter takes on a ritualistic quality. Every kill is a bloody tribute to a god that demands endless sacrifice and is never satiated. They are no longer soldiers, but fanatical devotees who see murder as an act of worship. Their entire existence is a quest for slaughter, wherein their dark god demands they outdo each previous massacre. There is no limit to their violence, no cap on the scale of their atrocities, and no endpoint to their butchery. They are not conquerors, but harbingers of a blood-drenched apocalypse. Now, I've talked to people in the community before that say that the World Eaters are probably the least scary Chaos Legion. And though I disagree with this assessment, I kinda understand where this mindset comes from. They are without a doubt the most straightforward and direct of the Chaos factions. They don't evoke the fear of the unknown, they have no desire to toy with their victims' sanity or inflict needless suffering on them. But let's be real here, this doesn't make them any less horrifying to the people actually living within the Imperium. They are a legion of unstoppable butchers that revel in carnage. They seek to drown the stars themselves in oceans of gore and take skulls in the name of their dark god. I watch a lot of horror movies, and although slashers come in a lot of different forms, to me the creepiest ones are always the ones that are most direct in their actions and simple in their motivations. Whereas the Night Lords kind of function like the Predators from the franchise of the same name, the Emperor's Children are like the Cenobites from Hellraiser, the World Eaters are more akin to a Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, or a Leatherface. Or honestly, a better comparison is probably the zombies from the 28 Days Later franchise, as they're not actually the undead, but people who have contracted the Rage virus. Now, if you've seen that movie, I want you to imagine that, but replace all of the zombies with blood god worshipping Chaos Space Marines. A, that's going to be horrifying, and B, I would absolutely pay to see that movie, even though realistically, it's probably going to be pretty short. The World Eaters' endless thirst for blood, fueled by quite literal nails that are shoved into their brains, and the worship of an unknowable cosmic entity that demands endless murder, if those things don't make a Warhammer faction terrifying, I don't know what does. Even back during the Great Crusade, when the Night Lords were still loyal to the Emperor and mankind, they were, to put it mildly, a walking red flag. They were the masters of terror tactics and would wield fear itself as a weapon to conquer worlds and bring rebellious populations back into compliance. And the way they would go about doing this was pretty disturbing. You see, whereas other legions would show up and bombard a planet from orbit or lead a ground assault against the enemy forces, the Night Lords would deploy only a handful of Marines, who would then terrorize a local population. They would kidnap and torture figures of authority, mutilating them and stringing them up for the entire world to see, often broadcasting their victims' suffering via Vox across every channel, including those in surrounding systems. The message was clear: this was only a small taste of what they were willing to do, the actions of a few individuals. If their prey didn't submit to them and the entire legion was deployed, this was the fate of every living thing on the planet's surface. And honestly, this worked out pretty well. The threat alone was enough to bring dozens of planets into compliance. Now, however, in the 41st and 42nd millennia, their allegiance has switched. Now, the Night Lords have been set loose on an unsuspecting galaxy, ready to inflict pain and suffering on those they view as beneath them on a scale never before seen. Now, here's the thing. If you're a civilian living within the 41st millennium and you happen to be at the forefront of a Chaos Space Marine attack, it really doesn't matter which legion it ends up being, you're in for a pretty bad time. However, you might take solace in the fact that many of them will see you as an unarmed civilian as being not worthy of their attention. And you're still gonna die, don't get it twisted, but your death will likely come via collateral damage. If the Chaos Marines are here to fight, then their attention will likely be drawn to adversaries that they consider worthy. If they're here to raid for slaves, well, you're certainly not out of the woods yet, but it's likely they'll target individuals with combat training first to be used as slave shock troops in future assaults, or individuals that have some type of expertise that they deem useful. If it's the Night Lords you have the misfortune of being invaded by, all that goes right out the window, for it's you specifically that they've come for, and they will find you, they will catch you, and when they do, they will mutilate you in mind and body and subject you to tortures unimaginable, for no other reason than that they enjoy hurting things that are weaker than them. To the Night Lords, suffering is so much more than just the infliction of pain. It is an art form, an expression of power and control, and an age-old art that uses the human mind and body as its canvas. They have an affinity for skinning their victims alive, eviscerating them slowly, or subjecting them to mental torment. The terror they spread, limited only by their vicious and cruel imaginations. These guys take so much joy in murder and cruelty that they will frequently launch raids against backwater imperial populations with no clear military rationale other than to kill. Any cries of mercy from their victims are ignored, and survivors are rare. They leave behind only grisly displays of desolation, departing with whatever material gains they desire and the gruesome trophies of their atrocities. In the aftermath of such an attack, to the untrained eye, this may seem like senseless violence, but those familiar with the sons of Conrad Kurz know the truth. This is calculated and deliberate, a display of both power and a perverse pleasure wrought from an expert understanding of the human psyche. Now, just about everything about the Night Lords is disturbing, don't get me wrong, but the worst part is what they represent. They are a grim reflection of humanity's darkest impulses, cruelty for cruelty's sake, and the predatory desire to be feared. To many, they are mankind's darkest incarnation, or its most primal and distilled state depending upon your perspective. They have abandoned any semblance of empathy, morality, or mercy and exist now as apex predators that hunt not for sustenance or even sport, but a single-minded desire to savor the helplessness of their prey. The Night Lords don't seek power, knowledge, or salvation like other legions. They seek only to destroy hope, spread terror, and break civilization apart at its seams. The Warhammer universe is full of monsters, but they all have reasons that one could in good faith argue kinda justifies their actions. A sadistic species like the Drukhari has a lot in common with the Night Lords, and the two frequently get compared within the 40K community. However, the Drukhari torture their victims because they've evolved to derive nourishment from suffering. The Chaos God Slaanesh is constantly siphoning away their soul, and only by committing horrible acts can they drive her away for at least a little while. If they didn't do what they do, if they didn't conduct their raids and inflict suffering on others, they would literally wither away and die, their souls then subsequently being devoured by she who thirsts. But the Night Lords are not suffering from any kind of soul thirst. They do what they do simply because they find it fun. This may be a blasphemous thing to say, and I'll totally own that, but from my perspective, the Night Lords have more in common with the Orcs than the Dark Eldar, as the Greenskins also are just doing what they find fun. Side note, I know it's regarded as more of an action movie than a horror movie, but even still, the alien from the movie Predator was something that scared the bejesus out of me when I was a little kid, and was definitely too young to be watching it. It was a monstrous killing machine, wielding weaponry so much more advanced than anything at your disposal that anyone other than an action movie star with a whole bunch of plot armor had no chance of actually standing against it. If it got a hold of you, it wouldn't just kill you, but skin you alive, and use your remains to taunt and terrify your allies. The idea that this thing could be anywhere and seem to genuinely enjoy terrorizing you is something I always found particularly creepy. From my perspective, the Predator and the Night Lords have a lot in common. You could honestly just have dropped one of these Space Marines in and replace it, and it would have been the same movie. The biggest difference between them, however, is in the Predator films, it's normally just one of them or a small group. But over here with the Night Lords, it's an entire legion of sadistic, superhuman serial killers. So yeah, it goes without saying that the Night Lords are unbelievably horrifying, and they're definitely going to be a lot of people's #1 pick for scariest Chaos Legion. Oh boy. Okay, where do I even begin with the horrors of the Emperor's Children? Potentially the most sadistic, depraved, and downright upsetting Chaos Legion in 40K. There's honestly a lot to unpack with these guys, especially when we're talking about their horror elements. They are sadomasochistic, hedonistic sensation addicts who worship the god of excess, Slanesh. These guys desire to experience ever more extreme sensations and have been twisted into a depraved band of sadistic torturers by their desires. Each and every one of them is a virtuoso of pain, a maestro of mutilation, and a conductor of agony on a planetary scale. They do not kill out of a sense for duty or even hatred. They do it for pleasure, for the thrill of breaking minds and bodies in new and inventive ways. To them, existence is a canvas for sensation, a realm where limits are made to be destroyed, boundaries shattered, and taboos broken. Nothing is ever enough for them, no sensation too extreme. With every year of their existence that they continue to blight the physical universe, their depraved god continues to push them to commit ever more abominable acts. The sheer boundless depths of their depravity makes them one of the most unique and terrifying Chaos Legions in existence. It should probably go without saying, but being captured by one of these guys is, like all things with the Emperor's Children, pretty extreme. There is no limit to the pain and suffering they will inflict upon you, and literally anything you can imagine right now that they could possibly do to you is something that they would probably find quaint and benign. These guys have spent millennia sampling the most esoteric and exquisite agonies from every corner of the galaxy and across dimensions. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. Everything about the Emperor's Children is disturbing in one way or another, but all of it's fantasy, so when I'm reading about it, it creeps me out, but kind of like in a safe, fun way. But the thing that really gets under my skin with them, the thing that creeps me out more than any other faction of Chaos does, is their perverse pseudo-sexual joy they take from agony, whether that be inflicted on their victims or themselves. But I don't know, man, a horror movie slasher that is also figuratively and somewhat literally horny for murder is a billion times more upsetting to me. Now, in an admittedly vain attempt to not get this video demonetized, I'm not going to fill this segment with specific examples of terrible things that they've done to people in the books. Check out my Noise Marine deep dive if you want some examples of that nature. But just to give you some insight into how their minds work, I want to share with you an example that starts off kind of benign and then ends up in pretty disturbing territory real quick. In the novel Lord of Excess, we're introduced to a member of the Emperor's Children known as Xantine. Now, he started experimenting with a new type of sensation that's foreign to all Space Marines, the sensual touch of somebody that loves you. The book literally opens with him seemingly copulating with a demon. Now, it's revealed they're not actually doing the deed, that's not what he's fixated on. The feeling of another's skin against your own, their warm breath against your neck, the weight of their body pressed against you, the feeling of their heart beating just under your fingertips. As a sexless tool of war, Space Marines don't really get to experience any of this, so he's become obsessed with it. This is a new sensation for him to explore. However, the reason he's seeking out these sensations in the first place is because this guy has a particular fixation on lovers when choosing his victims. He said that it's the way that they would look at each other right before they died, the way they would throw themselves in front of him, sacrificing their lives to buy another time to escape. The suffering of lovers was a sensation more delectable to Xantine than any other. You see what I mean? The spectrum of sensation here goes from kinda sweet to disturbing really quick. Anyways, the Emperor's Children draw a lot of comparisons to the Night Lords for obvious reasons. They're both torture enthusiasts, but there's a few critical differences between them. The Night Lords are predators that hunger for a sense of power over others. By spreading fear throughout the weak, they cement themselves atop the food chain in a galaxy full of monsters. Now, don't get me wrong, there are elements of this within the Emperor's Children as well. And though they can appreciate the Night Lord's taste, they see their palates as ultimately timid and unrefined, limited by a lack of imagination. Both factions delight in the suffering of others, but unique to the Emperor's Children is the routine infliction of suffering upon themselves, whether that take the form of filling their armor with razor blades, mutilating their own bodies, ingesting venoms and poisons from the galaxy's most dangerous animals, or augmenting their ears in order to better appreciate extreme auditory sensation. Sounds that by themselves are so loud they can shatter minds and liquefy flesh. No matter what form these sensations take, they savor each agony with a perverse delight. For the Night Lords, terror and fear are everything. And the Emperor's children appreciate this, and they understand that fear can come in a million different forms with a million different types of sensations. It's multifaceted and complex, but even still, it's only a single fiber in the tapestry of emotion and human experience. And in a galaxy full of unsampled pains and pleasures, the sadistic appetites of the Emperor's children are never truly satiated. Before we move on to the next legion, there is one more horror element about the Emperor's children that I think is important to talk about. You see, for as deranged and sadistic as they are, their path into damnation is a mirror of many people's own experiences. And I'm not even talking about actually battling addiction or anything like that, because I'm certainly not equipped to talk about something that heavy. But whereas the path of corruption for other legions is something that many of us can look at and confidently say that we would never fall victim to, with the Emperor's children, it's not that simple. The simple pursuit of trying to get better at something, enjoying the taste of a well-prepared meal, taking pride in your accomplishments, feeling joy when you see someone you care about smile, these are all sensations, and the ability to perceive sensation is a critical aspect of what it means to be human. The fact that this has been perverted into a gateway to excess and madness is kinda terrifying to me. Right now, and even back when they were loyal, the Emperor's children were obsessed with being perfect. And though this is something that we can meme on, the core desire of wanting to improve at something that you care about is something that each and every one of us can relate to. You see, they're not only horrifying because of what they'll do to you physically, but mentally, they horrify us because they are us. They are a dark reflection of our most basic instincts and our most primal desires, taken to their most extremes. They represent a warning of what lurks just beyond the boundaries of our ambitions, a bottomless well of madness and obsession. Out of all of the Chaos Legions, to me, the Thousand Sons are the most Lovecraftian, and exemplify many of the terrifying elements commonly associated with cosmic horror. Much like how in H.P. Lovecraft's stories, the characters are almost always scholars, researchers, scientists, or some other form of truth seeker, so too are the Thousand Sons warrior academics who sought to learn the truth of reality. Like many Lovecraftian characters, the Thousand Sons would end up digging too deep, uncovering the forbidden secrets of the universe that were horrible, indescribable, and best left forgotten, such as the knowledge that dwelling just beneath the surface of reality were ancient godlike entities that viewed mankind as nothing more than playthings. I find it fitting that out of the four Chaos Gods, the one that they worship, Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, perhaps has the most in common with Lovecraft's Great Old Ones and draws the most inspiration from his mythos. He is an unknowable being that lurks in the dark corners of space and time, whose true form is as inscrutable as his goals, whose nature is so terrible and incomprehensible that if an untrained mind was to catch but a glimpse of his truth, they would be driven into inescapable madness. The fear conjured by the Sons of Magnus is not one of brute force or bloodlust, but the dark, incomprehensible depths of forbidden knowledge. They are scholars of the arcane, weavers of dark sorcery, and seekers of eldritch lore who willingly trade their sanity for power. 10,000 years ago, the Thousand Sons swore an oath to gather and safeguard knowledge, utilizing the wisdom of the cosmos to protect humanity. Yet now, in the grimdark future, the very knowledge they once sought to wield as a tool of enlightenment is instead wielded to bring about ruination and madness, their sorcerous gifts having proven to be a curse that led them down a dark path into damnation. To these eldritch sorcerers, space and time and even reality itself are pliable materials. To fall victim to them is to be violated on every level. They can bend your sanity well past its breaking point and twist your flesh into grotesque and unknowable forms. They can trap you in an endless loop of pain, force you to relive your worst memories over and over, or expose you to truths so terrible you are left irreparably insane. Now, the nature of change and the influence of Tzeentch know no limitations, so it's possible they will submit you to any one of these or another infinite possible horrifying scenarios. To confront them is to confront not only the monstrous power of sorcery, but to unknowingly step into a trap set eons before, woven across dimensions through layers of manipulation and deceit. It is to face your own insignificance within an uncaring universe. It is to understand that every action you have ever taken, thought you have ever had, and every choice you have ever made was predicted, manipulated, and used against you by entities older than time itself that defy mortal comprehension. As wielders of the terrible truth of reality, the Thousand Sons do not simply kill their victims. They break spirits, corrupt souls, and twist sanity so thoroughly that they leave the victim shattered in ways that transcend physical harm. To me, the most horrifying, creepy thing about the Thousand Sons is what they represent. They remind us that even the greatest minds can fall, even the most noble of pursuits end in endless suffering. That even those who seek something as simple as the truth can end up damning themselves and countless others, all dragged kicking and screaming into the eternal, uncaring abyss. Like horror itself, chaos comes in a billion different forms, each scary in their own unique way. Now, some legions may be dedicated to one chaotic path more so than the others, but the Wordbearers stand apart from their kin as true devotees of Chaos Undivided. Because of this, all of the horrifying elements of each legion are readily on display here. Now, what makes them uniquely terrifying, though, is their fanatical devotion to the Chaos Gods. Their horror is one of corruption and possession, of religious fanaticism, and a twisting malign influence that warps and enslaves the soul. They are missionaries of damnation who spread the primordial truth that the Chaos Pantheon are the true gods of this universe, and humanity's submission to them is inevitable. The same reverence that they once had for the God Emperor and the holy expansion of the kingdoms of humanity has now been twisted into the exact opposite extreme. Theirs is a profoundly disturbing faith that they adhere to so completely that they are rendered utterly remorseless, dangerously creative in their cruelty, and characterized by an affinity for ritualistic atrocity. Whereas other Chaos Space Marines may be motivated by personal glory, a desire for conquest, or selfish gains, the Wordbearers seek only truth through unholy acts of devotion committed in the name of the Chaos Gods. Such desires are perhaps even more terrifying, as their faith renders them impervious to reason, logic, and fear. There is no bargaining with the Wordbearers, no chance for mutual understanding, and no room for compassion or doubt. They embody the horror of zealotry in its most extreme, monsters who believe that every act of cruelty brings them closer to their dark masters. The Wordbearers have no moral compass in the way that we would understand it, nor do they know anything of restraint. To them, agony and fear are gifts to be given freely, and every profane atrocity they commit is justified. Whether it be mental, physical, or spiritual in nature, the more suffering they inflict on you, the more the veil between realities thins, and the warp's grip on our universe strengthens. Having to face these guys in all-out war, or worse, being captured by them alive is one thing, but often they or their cultist followers will infiltrate a world undetected, violating it from within. What makes them so insidious is that their corruption can spread from them like a sentient virus. Their dark apostles preach the gospel of chaos to the populations of conquered worlds, and through their profane sermons does the influence of chaos worm its way inside of you. The afflicted will be subjected to mental and spiritual decay, drawing them slowly deeper and deeper into the insanity of chaos. As it turns out, words alone can be more powerful than any weapon in existence, an idea more unstoppable than any plague. By the time their influence is detected, it's often already too late, the spiritual core of the planet already swollen with rot. Entire populations have been warped into fanatical chaos devotees like this, ready to sacrifice anything and anyone to the glory of the dark gods. The rituals the Wordbearers conduct are fundamentally designed to tear open the fabric of reality and let demons, or the malign effects of the warp, spill into the material universe. These are not simply acts of wanton cruelty, but carefully planned rites that subject the sacrificial victims involved to fates far worse than death. In fact, quite like with the DeathGuard, the release of death is not an end to suffering, as the victim's soul will be trapped for eternity, damned to the whims of thirsting gods and hungering demons. These tortured souls are often utilized as an energy source by them, their suffering akin to fuel that can empower demonic entities, demon engines, and dark energies. The Wordbearers are not just brutal killers, but missionaries of ruin, To face them is to witness the annihilation of hope, order, and sanity. It is to witness the primordial truth of the grimdark future, that you are utterly insignificant in the face of the cosmos, that the facade of reality hides only an eternal nightmare from which there is no escape. Much like everything involving the Alpha Legion, their horror elements are not immediately visible on the surface. They're not crazed psychopaths like the World Eaters, nor are they living corpses like the DeathGuard. Hell, honestly, if we start comparing them to their cousin legions, they seem, somewhat normal. It's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people end up gravitating to the Alpha Legion as their favorite Chaos faction, especially if they're normally more into the Imperium. More so than the other Chaos factions, they embody what it means to truly be Space Marine renegades, rather than slaves to darkness. But don't let those first impressions and familiar aesthetics fool you though, as the Alpha Legion is just as terrifying as any other Chaos Legion. In fact, I would go as far as saying they're a masterclass in psychological horror. The Alpha Legion intertwines its preferred skill sets of subterfuge, infiltration, and misdirection into a deeply unsettling presence that deceives and manipulates its victims. They almost never announce their presence in some grand declaration of war, instead choosing to lurk in the shadows for months, years, or even decades at a time, slowly chipping away at their victims' sanity, unraveling their mental safety nets of trust, loyalty, truth, and even their perception of reality. Both the Legion Space Marines and their mortal followers are trained in the arts of disguise and impersonation. As Astartes are larger than normal humans, their Space Marines will either choose to remain hidden or take on the identity of naturally larger individuals, such as gene-enhanced laborers. Their cultists, on the other hand, will embed themselves throughout their enemy's society in every conceivable walk of life, from menial workers to military generals. Some will murder key figures and assume their identities, whereas others will join different organizations as new recruits that are suspiciously well trained in the exact skill sets they need to quickly advance their careers and land themselves in positions of authority. Once fully ingrained in their prey's culture, they will begin to pick it apart from within by manipulating the perception of others, influencing key decisions in ways that benefit the Legion, and sabotaging vital systems, all while redirecting any blame or suspicion back on innocent individuals loyal to the targeted organization. By the time their prey realizes that they've been infiltrated, it's already too late. By this point, the Alpha Legion has rooted itself too deeply to be removed, like a rapidly mutating cancer. Over time, their presence creates an environment of paranoia and distrust, where no one can be certain of who is truly on their side. If you were in the middle of this, you would begin to question your own sanity. You would be gripped by an overwhelming paranoia that caused you to suspiciously eye every person you pass as a potential enemy. Even people that you have known forever, co-workers, friends, neighbors, even your own family members. You have no way of knowing who is a spy and who isn't, who is extending their hand in friendship and who is hiding a knife behind their back. To be the target of the Alpha Legion is to be gaslit on a planetary scale. It is to be plunged into an ocean of existential dread and have your sanity slowly eroded away whilst being surrounded by potential betrayals. Now, admittedly, the lore in this department is intentionally left vague, but there is evidence to suggest that the legionnaires of the Alpha Legion during the Horus Heresy and many of their warbands that exist in the modern setting are still loyal to the Emperor and his original vision of the Imperium. Whether this is ultimately true or it isn't doesn't really matter, as it allows them to operate under a veneer of complex morality and frequently justify their actions with the notion that they're working towards a greater good. To those privy to such information, this raises both profound and deeply disturbing questions about loyalty, identity, and the nature of good and evil. The Alpha Legion attacks your mind so thoroughly that even when they've taken everything from you, your identity, your sense of self, your morals, your ethics, your ability to trust, even your perception of what's real and what isn't, when you, a loyal servant of the Emperor, have nothing left but your sense of duty to keep you from going insane, they attack that as well. They do all of this from the shadows, 1,000 eyes watching you in the dark without you ever even knowing they're there. Now don't get me wrong, I love all of the Chaos factions for their unique brands of horror, but the Alpha Legion's methods of preying on the human psyche in order to foster an atmosphere of uncertainty and dread is a unique and chilling aspect of Chaos that I'd love to see explored more often. Their presence is a constant reminder that in the grimdark future, the most terrifying horrors often lie not in the realm of the physical, but in the shadow of the mind. Seeing as the warp is traditionally pitched to us as a realm of emotions, and the chaos gods and their demons are negative emotions taken to their extremes, it should come as no surprise that these traits are characteristic of many of the Chaos Legions. But the Iron Warriors tend to break this mold, and are famously known for being mechanically cold and ruthlessly efficient. Everything, even emotional states, are a resource not to be squandered. They understand that even something like anger is finite and must be tampered and harnessed only in the heat of battle. Although they are perhaps the most heavily mechanically augmented Chaos Space Marine Legion, they are not machines, and though characterized by a lack of emotions, many Iron Warriors in the past have been shown to be viciously cruel and enjoy causing their victims to suffer. This is all to say that the Iron Warriors are truly miserable bastards who show a complete indifference to both human life and their misery. As masters of siege warfare, they often commit to long drawn-out engagements that are both brutal and clinically efficient, many of these assaults extending long past the point of victory. Whereas some factions would deploy in force in order to end things quickly, many of the Iron Warrior warsmiths will instead be aggressively conservative with their resources, sacrificing time to continue attacking the enemy's morale. Now, such warsmiths revel in the misery and feelings of hopelessness they spread, like a psychopathic child plucking the wings and limbs off of a fly, not out of malice, but instead a detached fascination with the way it squirms. To be on the receiving end of an Iron Warrior siege is to see everything you have ever known and every person you have ever loved meticulously picked apart brick by brick. It is to watch your world crumble under relentless bombardments long after your attempt to surrender was denied. It is to live in a constant state of dread and helplessness, where dreams of victory are crushed and even the strongest wills broken. Now, such an existence is bad enough as it is, but that's not the end of it. There is no end to the Iron Warrior's cruelty. It will eventually be revealed to you that your allies killed in the initial bombardments and those who died down in the trenches were the lucky ones. Now, as I said before, the Iron Warriors value efficiency over everything and apply this heartless logic to everything that they do. No asset is to be wasted, no resource squandered, including living human slaves, or simply the flesh as they often refer to them. Human beings are simply another harvestable resource to be gathered and deployed. Now, it's true that the dread practice of slavery is common throughout all of the Chaos warbands, but it is perhaps most infamously associated with the Iron Warriors. If you end up getting taken as a slave by one of them, a lot of different things could potentially happen to you, and none of them are good. On one hand, you may be taken back to the demon world of Medringar, a twisted mechanical hellscape that festers and churns under a black sun. A realm of impossibly high towers and plunging dungeons, a planet-wide jail where billions of slaves toil endlessly under the vicious eyes of cruel overseers. Many will be sent to the savage morticians or their dark mechanicum allies, where they will be subjected to horrific experimentation. Just so we're on the same page here, this is the legion that created the infamous demon Kulabas, living demonic wombs crafted from tortured slaves in order to birth more Chaos Space Marines. Sometimes slaves will be corralled into their void vessels and deployed to distant battlefields, set free into enemy minefields as a cheap and efficient way of clearing them. Or they might be given shoddy, borderline useless equipment and sent down to the battlefield against their own allies, as cheap and plentiful opening fighting forces that cause the Iron Warriors' enemies to waste valuable ammunition. Even if you somehow manage to escape from them, like maybe you manage to dodge all of the mines and make it to a relatively safe hiding spot, this reprieve is often short-lived, for the Iron Warriors will never allow a resource to be wasted, or worse, intercepted and utilized by the enemy. They will come for you, they will find you, and they will drag you back to their ships, where nothing less than a life of endless suffering awaits. So here at the end of the video, I'll admit I feel kinda bad for leaving the Black Legion out of this one, but I did so because their ranks are made up of members from every other legion. So all of the horror elements that we've discussed so far could be found there as well. Ultimately, I cut it because I was just repeating a lot of information that we've already covered. But I do think this is something very important to bear in mind with them. The followers of Abaddon exist even more so than someone like the Wordbearers as chaos in its most undiluted form. To be on a world subject to one of their invasions is to witness a unique blending of different chaotic horrors. Yeah, sure, the creeping dread of the DeathGuard is pretty terrifying, but at least they're slow. Well, what happens when it's the Black Legion and members of the DeathGuard are fighting alongside the World Eaters? Now you've got to deal with plagues that'll cause your bones and organs to turn to pulp while being chased by blood-crazed psychopaths. In a similar vein, trying to deal with the fact that you're being hunted by the Night Lords and subjected to their terror tactics, while also suffering from the paranoia induced by an Alpha Legion infiltration is, I'm just gonna be honest with you, sitting here thinking about it right now, I don't even have words for what that would be like. If I'm being honest with you, that would probably be my, all right, I'm a head out moment. But what do you think of all this? Which Legion do you find the most scary? Are you the most afraid of all of the cosmic horrors of the Thousand Suns, the diseased and leprous DeathGuard, or the Emperor's Children murder perverts? I'm actually genuinely really interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this one, as we all have things that trigger different fear responses in us. Now, I love Papa Nurgle in the DeathGuard, don't get it twisted, but I think because I was overexposed to zombie movies in the mid-2000s, I find them less creepy than the Emperor's Children, who honestly I'd probably rank as my number one in the scary department. But my wife, on the other hand, has tryptophobia, that fear of a bunch of holes close together, so she absolutely despises playing against my DeathGuard army. Some of their models she can't even look at without feeling immediately disgusted. Anyways, let me know all of your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, and ideas for future videos down in the comment section below. A huge thank you to everyone who supports all of the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.